Anyway, thank you all very much. For the afternoon, we have 2 panels planned for you. The first of which is a question, both practical and I think a bit philosophical, which is the accelerator model dead? We have a few folks here who will talk a little bit about that, our lovely panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment. But really, this is a question that I've been fascinated by as someone who's worked with accelerators for SOSV for a while now. Is the accelerator, it's something you hear a lot about. There's been an explosion in accelerators in the recent past. As a model, is that something that's still sustainable? Is that something that makes sense? And so we have the experts. We're going to ask them these very questions. So I'll just introduce them all. First up, we have Bill Liao, who is the European investment partner at SOSV, meaning he invests in, supports, and mentors companies and startups at all stages of growth. Bill also founded SOSV's biotech practice and runs IndieBio, an accelerator down in Cork. Next up, we have NOD, who is the CEO, editor-at-large, and co-founder of Silicon Republic, which is Ireland's leading technology and innovation news service, reporting online since 2001, and is also one of the driving forces behind Silicon Republic's Women Invent campaign, launched on International Women's Day in March of 2013. She's been involved in STEM for a long time, has lived in Europe, including France and Italy for years, and made her way back to Ireland in the 90s. So she's sort of seen it all. And then last up, we have Carl Power, who is the venture leader at NDRC. And his responsibilities include managing the provision of services and supports to investee companies and NDRC programs, as well as sourcing investment opportunities and mentoring those opportunities through to securing early customers and investment. So quite a range of experiences. We sort of have folks from inside the Dublin scene, folks who work outside the Dublin scene, and folks who have a bit of international experience as well. So I think what I'll start off by just asking is, perhaps before we begin talking about is the accelerator model dead, maybe I'd ask the panelists to just give their own definition of what an accelerator even is. I think there's surprisingly a lack of clarity around what an accelerator is, and so maybe if we have a working definition, that could lead to some questions right there. So I'll turn it over. I guess we'll start with Bill and we'll just move sequentially down.
So what is an accelerator? That is the question. Mm-hmm. So what is the model? I would say that 90% of the people in the world don't know and are giving it a go in one way or another, which is kind of entrepreneurial in a way. Here are the things that I believe that an accelerator is. It is a context, and yes, that's a big word, in which entrepreneurship optimally emerges. And to create that context requires a whole lot of ingredients. So one of the ingredients in a context, now when we look at contexts, if you want to actually look at how they're set up by the rules that you have, like the boundary conditions. If you don't have any boundary conditions, you've got no context, then people don't know how to behave. Right? And you see this all over the world. People poorly define what it is that's supposed to happen. There are no rules, and then people just go, whatever, and nothing happens. So in the accelerators that, in the model of accelerators that works, in my opinion, there are some very specific contextual cues. Cue 1, there is a selection process, right? And it's a rigorous selection process. Not everyone gets in. 2, accelerator is bounded by time. And in my view, 90 days is that time period, because I've tried different dates and different lengths, and they didn't work as well as 90 days. And 3, it's open plan, co-working, so that you get the most interaction between the teams. So those are 3 key elements of the model. There are many other little subtleties, but without those 3 key elements, I think you're kind of banjaxed. And I see a lot of incubators that are trying to make themselves out as accelerators. They have these very long periods of time, like 12 months, 18 months in the program. In my view, that's where startups go to die and then be reincarnated as undead. Right? So if the output of the accelerator is startups that go around like this, cash, give me cash, and they do that forever without ever making a sale, you kind of know that what they went through was not the accelerator model.
How do I follow that? Yeah, that's pretty well described, I would have said. You look at probably, I suppose, one of the early, most famous accelerators would have been Y Combinator, and I think what's interesting about that is what Bill said about the quality that's required to get in, and that's actually as important for the people who are trying to get into an accelerator, because if you don't get in, you're possibly not ready, or you've gone to the wrong accelerator. So
You're crap.
Or you're crap, which can happen, and you may need to start again. But that fussiness is actually a really good thing. And I think even Techstars only take 1% of who they see. And I don't know what the figures are for you. I'm sure we'll discuss it later. One of my favorite sort of definitions of accelerator would be it's a place where you do 3 months of business building, 2 years of business building in the space of 3 months. So again, I would kind of concur with Bill, is that if, the hint is in the name, accelerator. If you're not able to accelerate your business in those 3 months within an accelerator, again, you're in the wrong accelerator. So, sorry, rather than go on and on, they would be the key ones for me.
Yeah, so I'm not sure there is a generic definition, and I think everyone needs to look at if they think they need to go on an accelerator, and talk a little bit about that, they need to make sure they pick an accelerator that fits their needs and where they are. So I think Anna's right, an accelerator needs to take you from A to B. For me, it's not about education or entrepreneurship, it's about if you've got an idea that you think is potentially viable, and you think an accelerator can get you there faster than you would on your own. For me, that's the basis of whether you should go to an accelerator or not. For me, there is a time element. For me, it's more about the investment you need. I think it is important. So when we look at, in NDRC, we have a number of accelerators. So when we look at companies, we want to make sure that the investment we give them and the support we can give them will get them to the next point on their journey, whether that's to make them to a point where they're either investable or revenue generating. So if we think our investment won't get them to that point, or we think that the expertise that we have in-house is not going to help get them there, then we say no. And likewise, the other side of that is I think any founder needs to think about that as well. For example, don't go to an accelerator if you're looking to get educated. You must have a business proposition that you believe in. Otherwise, the activities of the accelerators, you won't benefit from them. If you're going through the exercise, an academic exercise is a proxy for an MBA. You learn stuff for sure, but the chance of you coming out with a viable business are far less. So an accelerator, for me, is something that puts capital in to help you move forward, but modest amounts of capital that are enough to get you to the point that you need to get to leanly, not the fat person that maybe you're referring to that's been overfed and taken too long. So for me, it's not about the duration, it's about the money. So what we have found, so where NDRC operates is in the pre-seed investment phase. And we have programs where we put in 20,000, and that's going to change in the near future, and programs where we put in 100,000, and we're looking to do something potentially in between in the near future as well. And we pick the ventures based on what we think they need to get from A to B, and if we can support them. We have found that particularly with ventures where we put in 20,000, that it's turned out to be not enough to get them to seed round. And we have over the last 2 years put aside a separate fund that we call Finishing Fund, where you can call it maybe the third or fourth best, but where they are likely to be viable businesses, but just need more runway or more proof points to get there. So I think when you're choosing an accelerator, choose one that will suit your needs for the point you're at in your life cycle. The amount of money they're putting in needs to get you to the next phase. It's not about the duration, it's getting to the next phase. And it's not about the program, it's about doing the program and whatever else it takes around the program to get to the next phase. And that should be your focus. And if it's an activity you're going for, it's an educational thing, and that's not an accelerator in my mind.
Great. I think it's interesting hearing these definitions, because I think what probably stands out to folks, especially folks here who might be searching for an accelerator, like Carl, it's interesting that you use the language choosing an accelerator, because sort of what we've said earlier was that maybe an accelerator is predicated upon exclusivity, right? The accelerator kind of chooses you. But what does it mean maybe in terms of the fact that you really can, if you're honest, you can window shop for an accelerator that will accept you and that looks good as a deal for you? Are we living in a time where there's just a glut? There are too many accelerators out there. Do you guys think that, this is sort of, we're at peak accelerator?
Yeah, I can. So it's become hugely noisy, if I can say that, since we started. And for entrepreneurship and education, there's a lot of them out there for that, and that's fine, because I think, particularly for Ireland, where we are in our economic life cycle as a country, creating more entrepreneurs is a good thing in my mind. And I think there's a need for those type of boot camps, or if they call themselves accelerators, I wouldn't. So I think there's a need for those. We've seen a lot of corporates come and go. It's a hard space to be in, and they fail for various reasons. They may be supported through their CSR budget, and whether it's things that are flavor of the month, they may grasp onto them and then they're left behind. I think the accelerators that continue are the ones that are focused on a mixture of what's best for the companies, but also with a focus on having a stake in them, and actually been driven by the success. If there's a shared success for the company and whoever's running the accelerator, I think they're the key accelerators. The ones that are doing it as an add-on, or maybe we might find some companies to buy out. What that means is you'll get a streaming fairly quickly, and the ones that don't fit those filters get left behind. So I think the general ones that are educational are good. I think there's too many maybe corporates that have the wrong focus, that I think are dangling something shiny that's only there for a few people.
Yeah, that would worry me a little bit as well. You get a lot of things that call themselves accelerators, and they're not, and that's a pity. And I don't know if there's a way of copywriting that or something, that these people should not be allowed to call it an accelerator. I do get concerned that there's a lot of sort of little initiatives that claim to accelerate, startups, and they don't. And you end up with almost this kind of dependency culture, where you have people with startup ideas, or they have a little idea in their head, and they end up going from one initiative to another, and they're not really learning, and they're not getting they haven't gone through the tough filter, which I think is crucial, because as you go through the filter, you may completely pivot or change your business model. And if people continue to give people free pizza and, nights out and hang out with us for a couple of weeks, that worries me a lot, because that time should be spent, if they have a true business, building their business and preparing maybe to approach a serious accelerator who will genuinely push your business on, or approach a real accelerator that will say to you, no, you need to go back to the drawing board, or you need to go to another accelerator. And also, I do think startups need to look at each of the accelerators and do their research. It's like you do your market research in business. I think it's really important they do their research on the accelerators they're approaching, look at the quality of the mentors, look at the quality of the alumni if they've been around for a while. I have a big problem with so-called accelerators that have mentors that have never been entrepreneurs, for example. I think, you really want a bunch of mentors who've been where you're trying to go.
Yeah, I look at a lot of, the noise out there, as you put it, and there's a lot of marketing out there that is reminiscent of the old incubator model. And it's like, oh, these are nurturing, fun places where you can come and we'll make it safe for you so that, you'll get a little cash and it's not so risky and, you'll have a lot of fun and you'll learn a lot and your business is going to get a really bright start. Make no mistake, if you come to one of my accelerators, it's not a hothouse, it's a crucible. We will put a blowtorch on you. If you are still alive at the end of 3 months, you have a very good chance of being investable. But there's an equally good chance that you will die in the program. One of the questions on my application, do you have a heart condition?
I guess so. It's interesting hearing you folks kind of praise accelerators that we all work with. But there's also a reality here where I think we're living through what's been called the Series A crunch, right? Seed funding is very easy to come by these days, accelerators being one of the vehicles by which you can get that initial investment. But for folks looking to kind of take the next step, what teams are finding is that it's exponentially more difficult than it might have been even 5 years ago. And that's coming from a few different places, including a really loud or noisy accelerator space. But I mean, is that fundamentally an indictment of the accelerator model, right? If an accelerator works, shouldn't a Series A be easy to come by or much easier to come by? And if we're not seeing that, what does that tell us about how the model exists today? I don't know if you guys have thoughts.
Well, I think one of the key things it tells you is that a lot of the Series A investors have been caught a little flat-footed. Because, look at us, 150 companies a year, 200 companies a year. Our deal flow is the equivalent of like 10 other VCs put together. That is a lot of companies, right? Physically in the world, that's a lot more startups. Now, multiply our accelerators by all the other accelerators, and even if only half of them are rubbish, that's still so many more companies that are in the market with a chance. I think that though it's not just a Series A crunch, I think it's a Series C crunch, because like accelerator money isn't seed money. It's like 10 to 100 grand. That's not even seed money. That's like walking around money. But the seed is actually, there's a bit of a seed crunch. There's a lot of companies can't even get that next 300K or 500K, let alone a Series A. Two things have to happen. Other investors, angels and VCs, have to actually realize that there is actually quality deal flow from some accelerators. And you see that some of them are now forming syndicates around particular accelerators. And so again, in your accelerator due diligence, look on AngelList. Do they have a syndicate that follows them? That's a really good sign. If there's an angel syndicate that's following the output of that accelerator, well, maybe you do want to try a little harder to get into that one because there is something coming after. But a lot of them, they don't even know investors, So, if you go through their process, maybe you learn something, but yeah, you end up on the wrong side of the wall.
So the Series A crunch is the question. So I think it's a great problem, right? So it's a supply and demand problem, okay? And there is no shortage of money in the world, right? It's just a case of where it's applied to. So I think if there are good quality ventures emerging that are investable, the money will appear. And I think it's going to generate a lot of innovation and funding. And I think it's a really positive thing. I don't think by any means we should stop doing what we do. And I think there is someone thinks they can have an idea and in 3 months they're ready for investment, and in 12 months time they're ready for Series A. That's a lot of people betting on your idea with a very little progress. Okay, so that's an expectation that is it's a wrong expectation. So if you expect someone to put millions into your company, you really have to have something convincing. Okay, so getting to that point is still extremely challenging. But so the question for me is, are there more investable propositions coming out of the system and just not enough money to invest in those? That's a great problem because it will drive innovation in the funding system. It's just a supply-demand problem that will rectify itself very quickly. For me, the question is more, well, is it that there just is not enough? There aren't enough investable propositions coming through, and that's why we're not seeing more money come in at that level. And I suspect it's maybe, there's maybe a mixture of both. There's a lag on the supply, and there's on the supply of money, and there's innovation that is needed to address some of that, but the quality is not there. And the expectations of founders to someone, I see people coming in with nothing other than their arms beside their sides and an idea in their head. It's just not realistic to expect someone to be putting millions into you 12 months later. That's only the few can do that. So, of the companies that we invest in, about 58%, are sustainable and, have investment afterwards. We expect a large drop-off. And we have in our programs a mixture of low due diligence, where we put in small amounts. And to be honest, that's, there's somewhat of a numbers game. Only some will get through. And then we have others where we put in 100K, where we do far more due diligence. So, but it is hard. But the money will be there if you've got a good proposition that's validated. If you've got a great investable proposition, there is money out there. You just need to figure out ways of capturing it. So things that, we find is that we've now got more of we're looking at more international investors. We find our investor days here. We had certainly a gap in seed funds in Ireland for some months this year. That we've had to go outside Ireland. And in fact, most people are going west to the US, all across Europe.
I think that's a really good point. It is a very small country. There's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in the country. Inevitably, only a certain amount of them are investable, but I still think there's a challenge for the investable companies, even the truly investable ones, because it's also to get that. I mean, obviously, you're not going to grow a company that uniquely focuses on Ireland. We have a population of 4.5 million. So you need to be looking internationally. That's expensive. Even traveling is expensive. You need investment if you have a fantastic business that needs to go places. And I do think that there is a crunch, definitely, where, when you're getting up to those. And I think the interesting thing about, and I'm interested to hear you talking about going more towards the international investors, because I believe that is probably part of the answer. Because again, there's such a small number of funds in that here in Ireland. And you look to the States, and I was over there in San Francisco recently chatting to investors. And when they're talking about investment, they're talking in the millions, even for something really small. Here people are talking in the hundreds of thousands for something that could really go far. So for me, the problem is there. If you're talking about starting from Ireland, and I do think we have to look internationally to increase that availability of funding for the truly investable and international potential.
I think for founders here who are, I think as Bill alluded to earlier, looking, at accelerators, you should look at who's invested in the companies that have come out of it, and just not at seed round, but also at Series A. And if you are at seed level, is to try and pick an investor, a seed round investor, and typically you'll have an Irish investor in there. If you can get an overseas investor, that's great. If not, try and find an Irish seed round investor that has relationships with somebody and that can actually help you achieve Series A as well.
I think one problem that most founders are also facing in terms of Series A crunch is expectations out there of what traction is. 1 million is the new 10,000. And I'm talking about users, active daily users. If your DAU isn't at 1 million, then yeah, sure, you're a small little company, and yeah, they want to talk millions, but they won't want to talk millions to you unless you've got millions. Yeah, and that's a big thing. Like what is traction? And the barriers for traction internationally are particularly high right now. People have cottoned on to the idea that, well, actually, maybe a dog with the word internet painted on the side of it isn't going to be a scalable model.
Yeah, no, that's an important point.
What's interesting, I think, is what we're seeing more and more of is also the development of the accelerator as a credentialing process, right? I think, though, it kind of picks away at this tension where originally, at least, the model promised you, a much, basically a de-risked business, right? A business that was investor ready, traction included. And I think what we're seeing now more and more are folks saying, no, go through the accelerator. We're hearing it now. Go through an accelerator and, we'll start thinking about investment much later down the line than I think, early stage entrepreneurs are really, that's not the expectation they have. So I wonder, where exactly, like as an Irish company to begin with, where do you go, both in terms of traction, what do you need, but where do you go for the best accelerator experience? Is that something that you should be waiting until you have 10 million users, or should you be diving in earlier? We tell entrepreneurs all the time, basically strike while the iron is hot. Is that something, how risk averse should you be when you're looking for an accelerator, if that makes sense?
I think if an accelerator is doing its job and you're working well in the accelerator, you should have an expectation of a massive traction increase during the accelerator. And I think that's the best possible story to have, because as an investor, you're not just looking at quantum, you're looking at delta. And what do I mean by delta? I mean the change over time. So if I have, if somebody comes to me and says, oh, we've got 1 million daily active users, I say, great, how many did you have last month? And if the answer isn't 700,000, then that's not nearly as interesting to me as, if the answer was, well, last month we had 999,000 users and this month we have 1 million. I think you need to look at the accelerator as the time to get that traction increase. And a good accelerator will aid you in that. But if you're not at the point where you're ready to get that traction increase, maybe you are too early for the accelerator even.
Yeah, I agree. I think traction is key. But I think I mentioned earlier that we've looked at finishing to help companies maybe get sufficient traction. We also see companies that maybe can sustain themselves on revenues for some time, maybe while they get traction. And so we're also looking at, to date we've been very much focused on investor ready, and we've a new program coming out that we just launched, Catalyzer, and we're looking at also companies where we can get them to a point where they're revenue generating and sustaining. Even if that's very low bootstrapping, that we give them the runway to actually get the level of traction that they need, so that they can sustain themselves. And getting the balance right between traction, revenue generating, and being investor ready is important. And we also, in that program, I've also seen a lot of opportunities, and I particularly look at the research, academic research base, where it's a lot of knowledge that can be applied to address real problems and market opportunities that may not be deep IP or defensible IP, but that knowledge could be applied in a way that might require consultancy services for some time, but over time could develop into scalable product business. So we're also exploring that as well. And again, the revenue generating part may give them more runway to get to a point where they have sufficient traction to get revenues or to get investment. But traction and with real customer traction is the key.
Yeah, I really like that, because we've been talking a little bit as if one size fits all in some ways, and there are so many different types of businesses, So like if it's a high potential software startup and it's expecting to get the millions that Bill is talking about, that's absolutely fair enough. But some businesses, I mean, if you came out of an accelerator and you had a sustainable revenue generating business, I mean, that would be a really good start. And then maybe you could stand on your own 2 feet and get the investment in later when you have the traction. I agree. That should be a positive as well. We shouldn't always expect people to come out of accelerators and necessarily be the next Stripe.
Yeah, I mean, one of my own personal gripes with the ecosystem that we have at the moment, and all of us that play in the ecosystem, including Enterprise Ireland, are looking for what's called high potential startups, or really scalable businesses. And for the most part, we all invest for equity, and that requires a sale at some point to get a return on equity. So we're really creating a lot of startups with a view to selling them. Okay, so NDRC is government funded, and I do wear a green jersey as well. And I think that's a shame to see that happen. But it's the reality of we need to follow the investor money in the markets, and that's fine. And I think that's okay from a growing point of view as an economy. But what I see really, I'm sure we all know people that run companies that employ 20, 30, 40 people, and they can form an important backbone of what happens here. And it's one of the reasons in our new accelerator that we're looking at revenue driven business as well, to be able to support those type of companies, and where our return is maybe through a different mechanism, and we want to explore that. Now, those companies won't will struggle getting, and probably won't get, support from EI, etc. And I think it's a huge gap in the ecosystem. Similarly with services-driven companies that, again, can be very viable, but may not be scalable globally. Now, we're initially going to focus on services companies that probably have a services product balance that may not be scalable globally initially, but potentially could be, but could actually create significant sustainable businesses. So we'll be experimenting in our next program. We've got a number of experiments running, so we will be looking at those. But you're absolutely right, Accelerator, there isn't, that's why, there isn't a generic definition for an accelerator, and that's why I think it's really the founders that will drive the shape of the accelerators, and you need to really understand which one suits you, because they're not all the same. And we have to change as well. It is a busy system, a noisy system. We're constantly looking for the gaps, and I think these are gaps that I've seen. They're probably not going to be attractive for some VCs down the line, and that's okay, but I think we can create viable businesses that have an economic impact in the country.
That really cheers me to hear that, because there is a gap at the moment.
Yeah.
There's really nobody that takes care of that type of business, and that type of business is what employs
So that program's
hundreds
called
of thousands of people in
Catalyzer, which
Ireland.
we're just doing. But I say we've got a number of elements in there that we're experimenting with, and assumptions on the gaps and the needs, etc., that we will test through that pilot.
That's really interesting.
No, that's cool. I think there's a huge chunk of the economy comes from those medium-sized businesses that VCs would generally refer to as lifestyle businesses.
Yeah, I was going to use that word, and I said I hate it.
So
I'm just saying, but it's kind of a slightly derogatory term in the VC market. I kind of like those businesses. I don't invest in them because you can never get out. But like, I like those businesses, and we do a lot, office hours, those sorts of things to support that kind of business, even though we don't invest. One thing that I would...
It shouldn't be your role to invest in those.
No, it's not our role, but we like to help. We like to help. I'm sure there are a few of those here, and we hope that they're getting value out of today. One of the things that I would also like to raise, though, is that because there is such a diversity of accelerators and there's a diversity of models, there is also the ability to suck it and see. And while if you went through 3 accelerators, I don't think I'd ever want to look at you. If you'd gone through 2, one of which was mine, I'd kind of be okay with that. So, one of the things I think is really useful is to get out of the country and go and experience another country. And there are tons of accelerators around the world that will take you. And so I think there is a growing market for accelerated tourism. Accelerators are quite dilutive, so you don't want to do it too often. But if you went out and did an accelerator, say, in South America, and then you came back and you did NDRC or you did one of our programs, I think that could actually also set you up in very good stead. A lot of my teams come internationally and they relocate to Cork. And people go, why are you making the teams relocate? And the answer is because when you relocate to do your business, everyone in the team works their damn ass off because there's nothing else to do. Right? Mummy knows that you can't come over on the weekend and fix the shed, right? Because you're in Cork and not in downtown San Diego. So I think that's also something to look at. Maybe take an accelerator outside of the country and then come back and do your business here. It'll also help you with your international aspirations to experience any other country and doing business in any other country. And that's one of the advantages of having so many accelerators out there, is that there is some of that choice.
And what is the general, if you were to go to, you'd know the market better than me, if you go and do that, because I really like that idea of the accelerated tourism. I mean, what is the average dilution?
The average dilution in the world today is between 6 and 10% per accelerator. And that's for a varying amount of cash. Some will give you 10 grand, some will give you 100 grand. There's some that will give you 250 grand. Now, some of the accelerators are non-dilutive because they either are supported by local government that are trying to get you in, or they're doing a convertible note that has a very high cap. And that's always a great deal, by the way, if you can get that, because then the dilution comes somewhere down the track, and you could accumulate 2 or 3 convertible notes and still have enough equity to be meaningful at the end. I think anything outside, anything that has your team commit, like think about it, right? We have teams that commit moving all their lives to Cork for 3 months. And what sort of commitment is that? Is that a commitment that you're ready to make? Is that a commitment that everyone in your team is ready to make? That's a pretty cool thing if they are.
I can definitely vouch for the Cork thing because I don't see Mike here, but we have a company that went through you first and came here, and Mike doesn't even have a visa to get out of Ireland, right? So he has no choice but to work all the time. Interesting. I've lost the track of the question. What's the?
We moved on.
Actually,
okay, you've answered the question.
I actually do want to open it up to folks here, but before I do that, I just want to ask: has anyone here actually taken part in an accelerator? One person. Interesting. It's interesting, right? Two.
They're hiding it.
I think if I were, I think if I were in the position of someone who hadn't taken part in an accelerator but was thinking about it, I would be very skeptical. I look at the past, 10 years ago. Really, all you had was YC. YC was just starting, I think, at 2004. And since then, you've had really a tremendous explosion, both here, certainly in the States, but all over the world. There's.
Mind you, it's worth noting too that almost no other accelerator operates YC's model.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I also want to talk maybe a little bit about the vertical. Like, there's so many different models. You have kind of government-sponsored accelerators. You have vertical-based accelerators. My question sort of before I turn it over to the group is 10 years from now, do you think we'll have more or fewer, more or less accelerators out there? Is this a fad? Is this an investment fad for VCs? Is this an investment fad for startups? Or is this does this model have real staying power?
Can I use the dreaded quotes? Do you mean accelerators or accelerators?
I mean accelerators. Real accelerators.
Well, we're.
Can you modify the question and say 5 years from now? Because nobody knows what's happening 10 years from now. And I just don't like to bullshit. Right?
I mean, you can say 5 years from now. I think I'm interested to see, is this a long-term thing? And for me, 10 years is in some ways more telling. But if you only feel comfortable evaluating 5, I'll hear you out.
What were you doing 10 years ago, Connor?
So at the moment we're publicly funded, right? So if there's enough accelerators out there doing, private accelerators with private money, we'll step off the pitch and do something else, right? So, but I'm not sure that, I don't know, if that will happen. I think we've all seen, I would think every year for the past 4 years has been a private accelerators come and gone in the Irish ecosystem. So for some people it is a fad. I think there will always be accelerators. I'm not sure there will be so many. I do think we will see more verticals, for sure. And I think there will be a mixture of generics, verticals, and even under the same roof. And I expect that's where we will end up. So I think the shape of them will be somewhat different. I think there will be maybe not less in terms of volume, but maybe less people running them, but running a variety of different ones. Like I said, accelerators, pick your accelerator that matches where you are in your cycle, and I think we'll probably see accelerators multiply across that spectrum as well. There was something I was going to say earlier about the percentage that accelerators take. So I did an exercise a couple of weeks ago when I was looking at our new accelerator and what price we'd put on it. So I looked at about 45 accelerators across Europe. Now, I only looked at the ones that invest cash for equity. Okay, so I excluded the convertible loans or government ones where they put in money for no equity stake. So just assuming it's an equity-based stake that they're taking. Basically, we were looking at a 30K investment. What would you get for that? But basically, the average was for 27K, roughly 30K, it was 8%. So that was, and I would think that's consistent with your thinking roughly as well. So that's sort of an exercise I did across accelerators, but that's only where they take equity. There's another bunch that do convertible loans, and we do that as well. We do a mixture of equity and convertible
the Start
loans.
Planet, where you put equity into the founder pool?
Right.
And you all get equity in each other's businesses, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, isn't it though, if that's the figure in Europe, because if you look to the States, and I know we keep mentioning it, but it's the obvious one, Y Combinator, I think they do an average of 120 stake and they look for 7%.
Yeah.
Like that's a very, very different,
they started on at 20K, right, dollars, and they've moved up, right?
Actually, they buy your equity for $1. The way the contract works, the 8% they buy for $1, and then everything else is in a note.
Okay.
So it's a really complicated little thing.
Gotcha. And they've also, what's interesting, what they've done recently is they've just, I think just this month, launched a follow-on fund. Did you see that? Which is, I found that quite interesting, a large accelerator like that.
500 startups have done the same thing.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And I mean, arguably that's our model at the US, right? Because we're a fund.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of accelerators are trying to become funds. We're a fund that decided to do accelerators. So we've both come to the same conclusion from different angles.
But I'm just wondering if to answer your question, is that the model we will see more of? It looks like it might be going that way, whether it be funds going back to do accelerators at the beginning or whether it be accelerator, launching funds at the end. I do think the vertical thing is interesting as well. I just wonder, and I suspect I'm probably referencing something that you might say, Bill, here, but when I was talking about the importance of the network of mentors and alumni that you can learn so much from, you'd have to ask, is specialization, would that be really, really useful so that you ended up with accelerators? And I mean, for example, IndieBio is a great example of it, where you end up with accelerators where you have so much to learn from the mentors. And so I don't pretend to see what's going to happen in 5 years' time, but you'd have to wonder, that could also end up being the model.
I think more verticals is kind of inevitable. I think that more accelerators is kind of inevitable. I think also that people are going to get pickier on both ends because they have to. I mean, accelerators work because numerically they work, right? A certain percentage of companies goes into a startup process, whatever that is, and most fail. And then with the good accelerators, slightly less fail. And as soon as you have an arbitrage like that, money is going to find that. And that's what's happening. And as long as the economy grows, well, more of that happens. I think we're going to see something new, though, in the next 5 years, which is pre-accelerator programs. And you've got NDRC kind of has that with the 20K thing, but I think you're going to actually see even shorter. I think we saw Startup Weekend sort of rise and then get acquired. But I think somewhere in between there lies a sort of ideal program for pre-accelerators. So that would be my 5-year prediction is it's kind of like the right prep school before you go to university. Yeah, we're going to see that. I don't know whether it's going to add any value, but I think we're going to see it.
Yeah, so definitely on pre-accelerators. So we've run some pre-accelerators, and maybe just for verticals. When we talk about verticals, it might be fintech, and we've run a fintech vertical before. I think we're now going to look at verticals within more narrow slices within that. It's such a big area. You may have areas in SaaS, etc. Or we had female founders, which is not quite a vertical, but it's
no.
Yes.
It's not a vertical.
Can't call that a vertical.
Don't call that a vertical. But
I mean, if you're a lone male founder, get a female founder. I mean,
so verticals other than female founders. That's what we mean. But pre-accelerators we found, and we're going to run 3 next year. We have found really useful. So someone that has an idea or proposition, or they've got access to IP and they don't need a team. So one of the most difficult things that we deal with, particularly with ideas or IP coming out of the research base, is actually getting a great team around the IP or around the idea. And I spend a lot of my time trying to match CEOs or entrepreneurs with ideas. And the pre-accelerators are great for that, because trying to figure out if you can work with someone over teas and coffees and will be your CEO is really difficult. But if you run a pre-accelerator, and we don't put money in, we just have this space and our time and mentorship, and we sort of take you through that sort of problem.
Do you take equity for that?
No, so we see that as it helps our pipeline, and it's a value add hopefully to the ecosystem. So
I was just curious, would you see pre-accelerators taking equity?
I think there are greedy people everywhere.
So when I say pre-accelerator, this is pre-formation, right?
I
Individuals,
understand that.
and our early one we called swequity, right, which is sweat equity, right? So there was no equity to take because there was no company. So as a group of people come together, and we use a crowdsourcing process for people to self-select. And then we take them through a program that may be 8 weeks or 10 weeks long. So for us, we get to watch the dynamics of the team. We get to work with them, validating their problem solution. And they get to work, more importantly, they get to work with each other and figure out, can they work with each other? And I find particularly for researchers coming from academia, it really helps them appreciate what commercial people and entrepreneurs can bring to a startup. So when they do have the equity discussions, they can be more reasonable. But that's a great way to get through an ideation phase of, is your idea likely to have some commercial merit? And we'll be running 3 of them next year. We're still deciding, will we have them generic or should we keep them vertical, even as pre-accelerators?
Do you have a founder vesting agreement, of course, on that pre-accelerator? Because if not, please do.
So no, we don't. So we don't have an agreement.
But like, please show them.
You have a special request.
Like tell them about founder vesting. And
sorry. So as part of it, we talk about founder vesting, good leaver, bad leaver, and all that good stuff.
But give them a contract that they can, when they leave your accelerator, they can go and collect.
So we have a boilerplate that we use for that. But a lot of it is to stimulate the discussion. Founder vesting, a lot of people think it's for the benefit of the investor. And, well, we know, we've worked together on stuff. It's typically for the fallout between founders and to protect.
Recently worked together.
Yeah, absolutely. and it's one founder, you can't guarantee what's going to happen in the next 2 years or 1 year, let alone 5 years. Someone has to leave a startup and you need to be prepared for that.
That's great, thank you all. I think we have a couple audience questions that I want to just make sure we get to. So if people have questions, I think there was one over there. Maybe if we have one other one kind of ready to go, I can give you.
It kind of follows on from what we were saying. I was wondering if you noticed any trends in new accelerators or existing accelerators that you would explicitly think is a bad idea, or you never got to it and you think it's potentially has bad applications for the accelerator model.
I think there are some that do it for, the coolness or to help their brand, and these may be corporate ones, and they may do it with good intentions in some cases coming out of their CSR funds, and they're helpful, but I think they dilute the general perceived value of accelerators in my mind. We've had, and I'm not referring to Ira here, but we've had a number over the last number of years like that, and I don't think that's helpful. I think we have some, particularly in academia, that are not accelerators, they're entrepreneurship educational programs in my mind. They help them get through like a pre-accelerator maybe, help them get through the ideation model, but it's actually not going to get them to, in my mind, an investable or a viable business. But I think they're good and I think they're important, but I think because they're called accelerators, I think it confuses things. So for me, they're not accelerators, and some of the corporate ones can be good, but some of them can do it for the wrong reason. And if you're doing it for the wrong reason, you can have bad effects. So if someone's doing it for kudos as a CSR, they're not particularly interested. They're interested in their career back in corporate headquarters and not your success. And so unless they accept the people in the accelerator, if their success is tied to yours, they're the accelerators that you really want to connect with.
I see a lot of rubbish out there that does more harm than good. I don't think they're good. I think they're awful. If you can use the word cozy in any way, shape or form in association with an accelerator, run.
Well, I just think there's a trend of things that call themselves accelerators and that aren't. As I say, the clue is in the name.
Do you think that's intentional? Sorry, can I ask another? Do you think that's intentional, or just using the word accelerator maybe
out of ignorance?
I think it possibly is ignorance. Yeah.
I'm sure it's ignorance. Yeah. Nobody's that evil.
Yeah. I think people have forgotten what it means sometimes, and they just, they just go, "Oh, this is an accelerator."
Road to hell paved with good intentions.
Maybe one more question. Yep.
Okay, so he asked the question about accelerators. Now I want to kind of phrase that question towards startups. So I'm guessing think it's a safe assumption to assume that you guys see a lot of startups in your day-to-day roles. What is the trend with startups?
And a lot of start knots.
And start knots, yeah. So what is the trend with that? I mean, entrepreneurship is not new, but the startup scene is relatively new, and a lot of people must be, okay, I want to start something up, I'm going to apply to this accelerator. So what's the trend of new startups that you're seeing at a good, I know 1% or a very small percentage of startups succeed, but I'm sure you must be getting a lot of inflow of new startups. So what is the trend there? Like
From our perspective, so for Launchpad programs, in terms of volume of applicants, so startups have been around for a while, so it's not in the last 2 or 3 years, it's earlier than that. So I would say the volume of startups applying for our programs has increased, almost doubled. In our Launchpad programs, 2 years ago, we were investing in 30 companies a year, 15 investments in January and then another 15 in September. Last year, we invested in 8 and 8, and I think this year we've got 8 or 10 started in January. We can invest in more, okay, but we didn't get 15 that we would invest in. The quality. So the flow is there, the volume's there, but the quality has reduced.
Okay, so what do you guys look for then? When you say quality, what is quality to you in the startup?
The quality, the idea, and the team, in terms of being able to execute against it, and the stage that the idea is at. Can our investment and our support get it to a point that it can continue on its journey from, whether that's investment or revenues. And for the most part, I would say 80% of the ideas are similar, and every year there's a trend. Or over a couple of years, you might get the same trend of, so this year it was less loyalty apps, but for the previous 2 years, you can be guaranteed there's maybe 50% are going to be loyalty propositions. So we don't look for ideas to be validated when they come in. Okay, we're at such an early stage, so we're not looking for something that is validated. So we are taking a risk on the idea, but it's really around whether the idea we think is likely to be successful. Okay, and the team.
The trend we see from our point of view, I don't pretend to be an expert on startups, but we get a lot of press releases from very, very early startups. We're bombarded basically with people who've just had an idea that day almost, and they'll write a press release. And there is a tendency, like I will cry if I get another press release that says you're the Uber of something. There is a huge move that way at the moment, and people have come up with fantastically original ideas that are genuinely the Uber of something else. But 99% of what we see are clones of things that we've already seen. We actually had a natter about, I won't name any names, but about a company that I saw launch last week, and I went, but that's identical to a company that launched in Ireland 2 years ago that's serving the Irish market. And I thought, why would you want to just copy exactly that model with nothing new? So that is a bit of a concern, I think, is that you have, for me, a viable startup is always a team of people who have a fantastic idea and who are able to bring it on.
And in my opinion, have suffered through the problem that they are solving. Like genuinely themselves really gotten pissed off by it. And I see a lot of clone businesses come and they go, oh, but I'm really interested in business, and I want to be an entrepreneur, and I want to make money, and I think I can do that, but just a bit better. And it's like, oh, please, just have original problem to solve, for God's sake.
So it'd start with the idea, not with the startup. You meet young people because it's become so hip and so fashionable, to be a startup. But there's no such thing as a startup. It's a business that happens to be in startup phase. It's a business that has a fantastic idea or business model behind it. And that is one of the trends you see, unfortunately. Now, hopefully, people like the accelerators filter out the really fabulous people who deserve to at least get a chance to go on.
Oh, we sure do, don't we?
Okay, I think we have to leave it there. Sorry, folks. There will be time. You can certainly.
There was one more
I
question.
know,
on,
but
let it
we're
in.
way over time.
Go on, let him in.
Overtime is fine. Oh, this is Ireland.
No, I think we will leave it there for now. But
Oh, you're overruled.
Heartless.
I want everyone.
Go
How
on,
short
go on,
is
it's
it?
a short question, go on.
10 words.
Okay.
Well, I've got a real nice. Credibility of teams, that is what you guys were just talking about there, and I'm wondering, how much does an accelerator add credibility to a team when those team members don't have credibility themselves in terms of previous exits or Harvard University or whatever?
I think the right accelerator can add a lot of credibility if that accelerator has a tough entry process that has produced a lot of good alumni and has an investor syndicate that watches it. I think you inevitably get some shine from that. Certainly, the bigger well-known accelerators for the generics, and then the vertical accelerators if they've had success. I mean, what we're trying to do in Indie Bio is really hard. Like we're leading on the edge of a very big new industry, being independent biotech. You can't possibly fail to lend some credibility with that because you've already created visibility for the accelerator itself. So, humans just work that way. Whether it's genuine credibility, then you have to look at where the money went, right? Did you get a follow-on?
Actually, my question was actually the reverse. Like, if you don't have any credibility within yourselves as a team, how difficult is that? What is an obstacle? How big of an obstacle is that versus going into an accelerator to get one? In terms of the likelihood to get funding.
Traction is the answer to that question. No credibility plus no traction equals no cash.
But you need one of the two.
Traction's better.
Yeah. Traction trumps all.
And delta in traction, right? Never forget that. Delta in traction. The change in traction over time, the increase in velocity is the thing that gets an accelerator, that gets any investor to open their wallet.
I didn't quite get the question. Was that an Australian accent?
Kiwi.
Oh, that's okay. That's
New
better.
Zealand.
Sorry. No, that's okay. That's different. Sorry.
You have to say, is it a New Zealand accent?
We're also way over
that's
10 words.
a lot better because I thought, wow, is this an Australian talking about team credibility?
Yes, I am an Australian talking about team credibility. Next.
Sorry. What was the question? Sorry.
Credibility is a big important aspect of approaching funding. If you don't have credibility within your team, your first-time founder, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I mentioned we at the moment we have two programs. We're introducing a third. One is at currently 20K investment, which is going to change, and the other is 100K investment. That typically, so when we put in 20K investment, we're focused primarily on that. Most people are first-time entrepreneurs, and that's okay. So we're looking for people that we think have the potential and ability and the drive and motivation. Okay, so we're not looking. So we don't expect the credibility to be there. If you're talking about track record, that's fine. Now, when you go to 100K, then we are looking for credibility. And when people come with ideas, we spend a lot of time talking about, we don't think you're the right person, or you are the right person, and we need to do some due diligence. So it depends. So for one, we're really and that's where Y Combinator started with lots of hackers. It's okay to be first-time entrepreneur, particularly on a lower amount. It's proportionate to our risk.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there for today. But just a big thank you to our panelists, Carl and Bill. Maybe we'll give a round of applause to them. Thank you all. Thank you all, folks. Thank you.